The European Commission, they're currently consulting on an amendment to the legislation. Essentially what they're proposing is a process where they approve the PET processes, the recycling process for PET, and then put all the other processes on hold. So if they are being used, they can continue being used, but they will be dealing with those at a later date. They've also decided to clarify a lot of obligations, obligations for recyclers and competent authorities. And the competent authorities in this context are the health enforcement agencies. And the rules for other plastics will be published at some later date. Now, what's the timeline for these changes? Well, we were hoping that the first part of the process, amending the recycling regulation, would have been completed in Q2 of this year. That didn't happen. And the authorization of individual recycling processes was going to happen in Q3. That hasn't happened either. I would imagine, my timescale for this would probably be the whole process maybe having been put back a year. And we'll start seeing the amendment. We'll see the amendment to the legislation in 2021, and the authorization of the processes and the decisions being published then later on in the year. But what I would say is that even in a non-COVID year, deadline slippage is not uncommon with the European Commission. It's a complex structure with 27 member state governments, and it can be quite troublesome to reach clear decisions quickly. But then again, I think I'm probably of the opinion that reaching a good decision a little bit more slowly is probably better in some cases than reaching a clear decision quickly. I'm trying to talk lastly about what's going on in the future. And the reason for this is that the European Commission has been going through a process to review the effectiveness of food contact legislation. It's something called ex post evaluation, and it started off in September 2018. And essentially what happened was the European Commission had been lobbied by quite a number of interest groups and member states with the opinion that the food contact legislation wasn't at the moment performing its intended task in quite the way it was hoped to. So they employed a group of consultants called Ecorys to interview members from industry, independent experts, regulators, and non-governmental organisations such as Chemical Watch. They ran that process from September 2018 to May 2019 and published an initial report of their findings in September 2019 and published a final report in July 2020. And I think the final outcome of the report was probably no great surprise. They did find a few key weaknesses in legislation. One of which is that although we've regulated plastics in contact with food very deeply, we haven't moved to produce regulations on many other classes of food contact materials. And the report identified sort of three main interlinked root causes for lack of progress, if you will. Firstly, there's not enough resources allocated to risk assessment, risk management, and enforcement. Obviously, if we have more resources, we can move quicker. But it's worth noting as well that governments are mostly resource limited and often need to balance off the needs of the food contact material industry with many other issues that might be troubling them at that particular time. Food hygiene, pandemic readiness, etc. There also wasn't any consensus on the approach that should, well, there isn't any consensus on the approach that should be followed to close the gaps in the legislation. And that was principally around how do we work out whether we're going to produce a new regulation on inks in contact with food, or paper, or another material. They also felt there wasn't a regulatory mechanism which could allow you to prioritise actions. So I think the conclusion is soundly that the report and the regulator are suggesting strongly that we need to start regulating for more food contact materials. They highlighted 5 priority materials: printing inks, paper and cardboard, silicones, varnishes and coatings, and rubber. Now, there is a certain advantage in these materials. It's that some of the member states already have legislation on these materials, and there's extensive knowledge of those substances within the industry. But what we don't have is any current way of prioritizing which goes first.